Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. We're pleased to have you, and we're excited to share today on what's your t-shirt size, um, focusing on right-sizing your cybersecurity strategy. I'm glad to see a lot of you in the that are joining us today. I know some of you very well, and we are going to spend time talking about the different size counties and some of the areas that things that are common across the board, but other areas that where can you start if you're a smaller county, medium-sized county, or a larger sized county. Before we get next slide, just want to go over a few things from a housekeeping perspective. We are recording today, and after the webinar is over, we will share the recording and the presentation with you in a follow-up email. When you join, we want to make sure you're in muted or listen only mode, but we also want to give you an opportunity to ask questions. So if you have a question as we go along, or something already that you really are hoping we answer, if you would post that in the chat. And it's a smaller group, so you'll have the opportunity even to come on camera and ask the question directly of our presenters today. So I'm Rita Reynolds, the CIO for NACo, and really enjoy working with all of you and getting to know all of you. We have Commissioner Graham. He is Commissioner in Audrain County, Missouri, and a great supporter of the IT and technology initiatives. And also, as he likes to say, a recovering IT professional, and has turned to politics as a result of that. And then finally, we have Kimberly Biddings, who's the Vice President of Product Development at BioKey International. Kimberly's been at a number of our conferences, and a lot of you have gotten to know her if you've been at one of the NACo conferences. So with that overview and introduction, I'm going to take a few minutes here before we get into some of the more detailed information. And I just want to share with you some statistics. These are statistics that I've gleaned just from reading and researching. And I get this question often from elected officials, so that will say, well, okay, I hear about cybersecurity and we know we need to put a lot of money into this, but why? And is it really that bad? And the reality is that it is a force to be reckoned with, one that we just cannot ignore. Every 39 seconds, there's a new cyber attack somewhere on the web. And that's a fairly recent number in the past 6 months or so, but I would venture to say it might even be less than that. There are 4,000 ransomware attacks that are taking place across the world daily. And we're going to give you some examples here in a few minutes. And there's a website that I didn't even know existed till a couple of days ago that you may want to take a look at. So I'll cover that as well. When it comes to the FBI, there's a lot of crime associated with cyber attacks. And to be clear, the FBI is there to help and to assist, but really from the criminal investigation perspective. And so they're not going to come in necessarily and help you clean up or recover data, but they are going to go after the bad actors. And since the pandemic, as you can imagine, 300% increase in those reports. And then the other area that I will reference is cyber insurance premiums. This is a very modest statistic from 2021, with cyber insurance premiums increasing by 25%. More specifically, with local government, those numbers have increased 2, 3, 4 times over from even a year ago. And Commissioner Graham, I don't know if you want to share a little bit from your perspective, but I know we talked about cyber insurance and what you're seeing with premiums.
Yeah, I'd be happy to pitch in on this, Rita. I had a note here to make sure I mention this. So we've had cyber insurance since prior to me being elected, which this is my second term. So I'm going on, it'd be 6 years here pretty quick. And it was basically a form that had two questions. You know, do you have computers basically, and are you connected to the internet? And that was basically about it. So this year, our insurance premiums increased by 62%. And so on top of that, it became not only do we have to check mark, you know, do you use technology and have internet? Now it's from two questions to basically a 2-page document that has to be filled out correctly to get coverage. And the scary part, I shouldn't say scary, the thing that I want everybody to be aware of is the people who are in Missouri, the commission has to approve any contracts. So if we have commissioners out there that are reading these things and checking boxes that really don't know what, and this would be a funny thing. So we had on our schedule that we were going to go over MFA and things like that. So one of my elected officials walk in and say, well, we don't use Missouri Farm Association for anything. So why are they on the agenda for technology? Well, MFA in Missouri means totally something different. So acronyms and all that need to be carefully worded also. But anyway, so what I'm concerned is you have somebody filling out a document that may not have all the answers. So make sure you go out, do the research, ask the right questions to the right people who can give you the proper answers. Because if one of those questions is wrong, then your cybersecurity policy is pretty much non-existent and will give you no protection down the road. So that's about what I had for insurance.
All right, well, thank you. And I really appreciate your sharing that, because I think it's important for those listening in today to hear from someone like yourself as an elected official and what you're experiencing on that that front when it comes to cyber insurance. So let's just talk a little bit more in terms of the types of tax on counties that, irregardless of their size. And this is the site I was going to mention to all of you. Of course, we see the constant, what's the word I want? We see the constant attacks in the news and in terms of the things that we're dealing with coming across the news feeds. But there is a site, and it's called secure, SECULORE.com. And I'm going to go ahead and post it in the chat as well. I hadn't come across that before, and it's a really helpful, there we go, site to take a look at if you have time, because it tracks all of those attacks that are happening across the United States by state. So some of these listed here are fairly recent, most of them. There was a county in New Jersey that was hit with ransomware. Another county that was recently hit as well with ransomware, and their residents are being told, check your credit reports. So I'm sure as this unfolds that there's going to be credit monitoring provided to those residents. It's yet to be seen how much and to what extent, but it hits our residents and our citizens, even from the public, I would say from the 911 center perspective and public safety. Fortunately, in some of the recent attacks, when the county's been hit with ransomware and a ransom's been put out there, public safety has been able to continue operating. And many of the public safety areas within the county have been able to continue. But in some instances, a sheriff's office or another tangentially related service, what's happened is they've had to go back to paper. And that's for another webinar. That's for another discussion of what's your continuity. But these are very much in front of us and happening on a regular basis. So one of the things that we've done here at NACo last year is we put together, well, what are those priorities and those best practices that we should be focusing on? And I know many of you have seen the document. The link is on the slide. You'll have it afterwards if you want to peruse that. But we're going to talk to a number of those different areas of what you should be facing and how do you do it if you're a small county or a medium-sized county or a larger county. So based on that, I'm going to turn it over to Kimberly Biddings to let her talk about the t-shirt size. We came up with this idea. Any of you in IT know the project management agile perspective. And one of the trainings I went to years ago talked about managing a project and managing phases of a project and putting them into t-shirt sizes. So that's kind of how we approach today's webinar. So Kimberly, could you talk a little bit about that and what you have in front of us on your slide?
Yeah, sure. This is full credit to Rita, by the way, because she saw the agile development with t-shirt sizing. And from cybersecurity programs, we talk a lot about maturity of program. And so when you think kind of small, medium, large, we look at kind of low, medium, high maturity in the sense of how developed are these things. And as you can see on the screen, when you're looking at your cyber program, you're not measuring your t-shirt, collar and neck and chest size and all of that. It's more so people, process, and technology. So what do I have in place for teams? How is my process defined and documented? What tech stack do I have in place? The other thing that's important to note, as kind of is highlighted on the right, is that as you're growing and maturing your program, a lot of things that are going to be part of that program will actually take more time, investment in both cost, time, resources. And so it's something that, again, small, we're going to have some really low hanging fruit, bigger, things that you can implement rather quickly. The more sophisticated you get, those things take a little bit longer and do require more investment from that perspective. But again, should be a really great way to help everybody out there decide, where am I at for my cyber program? Population size does, from what we've seen working with a lot of you out there, indicate somewhat of that maturity, but it may not. I've talked to very large counties who are also working on improving their cyber maturity from the ground up. So really depends on where you're at. And I think that segues nicely into our poll question, Rita. I'll at least talk about the right-hand side, and then maybe we'll start the poll. There's a QR code there. If anyone was at the legislative conference this year, we shared this tool. It's free to download. It's a 10-minute, honestly, it's a spreadsheet you can fill out. And it allows you to just assess very quickly, where am I at on that maturity scale for my cyber program. So highly recommend you try that out, download it. Again, about a 10-minute exercise. So Rita,
Right.
I'll turn it back to you for the poll question.
Sure. And so Kimberly is managing that for us, and she should have started it. Yes. Thank you, Kimberly. And it's asking you, those of you participating today, if you could just share, no county identification or anything, but what do you consider your t-shirt size from your cybersecurity perspective? Are you small? Are you medium? Are you large? Are you not sure yet? We refer to it as many times assuming, and that assuming is not a good thing, from being a small county, medium-sized, large county. But as Kimberly pointed out, you can definitely be anywhere in between, and maybe you're a small county, but your t-shirt size is medium. So we're open to that as well. So we'll leave that open for just a minute here. And I will say a couple words about the assessment as well. This was shared at our conference, our NACo legislative conference, and it's a very easy survey to take for those of you that even if you've done the NCSR and some of those other more in-depth surveys, this is just a good spot check to say, where am I at today? So I think we've given everyone enough time to respond to the poll question. Kimberly, go ahead and close the poll. And if you could share the results on the screen, that would be great. All right, we've got a pretty good mix here. This is excellent. Thank you all for doing that. So some of you are in that small area, and others a medium, and then others larger. That doesn't mean anybody's better than anyone else. We still all have a lot of work to do when it comes to cyber, and it's a challenge. I can tell you, I just finished writing an article for our NACo news and our NACo County News online, and it is definitely a journey. So we want to talk, the three of us, a little bit about what does that journey look like. Kimberly, why don't you talk a little bit about the journey, and then Commissioner Graham and I can chime in as well.
Yeah. So, when we talked about this, I think there was just really good dialogue on, first of it's ongoing. There's never been a point where I've talked to somebody, even the most very sophisticated organizations out there, that they're like, yeah, no, our cyber is good, we're done. And that goes to the state too, that obviously bad guys, right? The bad guys out there. And the way that we interact in a digital environment is always evolving. So you always have to adjust, right? And COVID was a great example of that, where we all had to very rapidly adjust to that. So always ongoing. And then Rita, I think you put it beautifully, where there's chapters, right? There's different phases of this journey you're on. Even in your small t-shirt size, you're going to have different chapters. And my main point and recommendation to anyone listening in, whether small, medium, large t-shirt, is have a roadmap, have reasonable milestones, like really set great project planning down, because that's a lot of what this is. Whether you're writing a policy, you're implementing a new solution, you're developing your awareness training, all of those things require really project management and project planning. So that's really where I see, cyber is something that has to be managed and continually managed.
Yeah, and as you were talking, I was just writing down, many of us that have done project management, there's what's called the PM BOK. So it's Project Management Book of Knowledge. And I just made a note to myself, the cyber BOK, the cyber book of knowledge.
That's good, Rita. That's good.
I know, right? The cyber BOK almost sounds like a cyborg. But seriously, the chapters, they can be a journey of chapters, or it can be focused on what I would call the travel chapter. When I'm traveling, the IoT chapter, and all the explosion we've had with the different devices now that are attached to the internet. It truly is a journey, and it's a journey. My goodness, if I go back 20 years, I could never have imagined we would be where we are today, and would never have imagined that the TV show The Jetsons, for those of you that are listening in today, we remember the Jetsons, and it's real. Like everything you watch on the Jetsons has happened and is happening. Commissioner Graham, do you have any thoughts on this journey as well?
Yeah, Rita, I'll pitch in a little bit here. It is a journey, and there's no destination. That's the thing, because it's going to keep evolving. So that's always been something that I've thought about, was, journeys are a lot different than going to a destination and you're done, you're there. So it is a journey. A couple of comments I want to make on maybe a previous screen or two, and this is all about the journey in Audrain County, is that I'll say that not all small counties think this is a critical issue, because the knowledge is just not there, and there's no infrastructure, and the people who are doing it are just sort of haphazardly getting things done. And so those are places we really need to focus on. In Missouri, and I looked through the attendance list, and I didn't see any of the counties. I'm not going to give county names, but in Missouri, we've had several situations with ransomware or just being locked out or deleting of data. One particular county, and there are about 42,000 total population of the county, they got hit. They totally redid their entire infrastructure, new computers and everything. It wasn't 6 months later they got hit again. So I don't know if it was the same group, but that just replacing everything doesn't make it secure and taking the best practices into account. Another county, which was just in the last month or so, they were ransomed, or they got locked out somehow, and their vulnerability was one of their software providers. And so we have to vet those providers that have access to the system. And so, back to the journey, a lot of it up front is the educational process of the people who have to make those decisions, because sometimes the technical people really don't have the pull to be able to sway the budget one way or the other. Some commissioners, a computer is just a device sitting there that you type on, but the road grader is the most important thing in their life. So, they'll sink hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars into that kind of equipment. But then when it comes to their technology, it's just sort of a no budget at all. So a couple things. And Kimberly, you stole my comment. I was going to mention low hanging fruit because there's a lot of that out there, just developing best practices, take an inventory of all your devices. And it's amazing if you think that the only thing that's counted on a network anymore is the computer sitting on the desk. You'd be amazed at all the different devices if you have open Wi-Fi and phones and everything else. And those are just as much a vulnerability as any computer sitting on the desk. Creating your policies, disaster recovery plans, all those are, I consider, low-hanging fruit, and not much economic investment, time investment, but maybe not as much as far as dollars and cents.
Well, and sometimes the time is what catches us off guard. I was thinking about it earlier, and it's, if anyone remembers the game Whack-A-Mole, and it's like putting out one fire and hitting the other one and hitting the next one. And it's hard to get ahead and find that quiet time to work on some of the best practices. But we're going to talk about that. And we're going to talk about a strategy. So Kim, if you would like to just share some of the strategy that you've seen effective, and then we can go into those t-shirt sizes.
Yeah. And I'll make one more comment on the journey. And Rita, actually, this comes, I think, from the webinar we did last year, which is like, start somewhere.
Yes.
Look, cyber is kind of an anxiety-ridden thing, right? There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of like scary stuff that happens. And one of the best lessons in life I've learned is procrastination, that we like postpone things, actually comes from anxiety, right? It comes from like hesitation to do something because we're either not sure how to do it or it's a big effort. There are bite-sized pieces that we're going to give you in this right sizing that should help you start somewhere, right? Or improve somewhere. But that's the one thing I've constantly said when I'm speaking to any county is just pick one thing and start, and you'll be amazed how quickly this cyber program really develops as you go. So yeah, Rita, as you mentioned, we've taken each of the t-shirt sizes and produced recommendations. It's not meant to be a holistic cybersecurity program by any means. But between the three of us, this is really the collaborative effort to say, for your t-shirt size, this is what we would highlight and recommend across those three areas of the t-shirt. So starting with small, again, sizing is based on process, people, and technology. Commissioner Graham, I'll start with you. We had a great discussion on smaller counties, right? A lot of counties in Missouri are not significant size or IT resource in the sense of cyber programs. And so talk about some of the recommendations that we've come up with here. And then Rita and I, happy to chime in, of course.
Yeah. Thank you, Kimberly. A few of the things I've already mentioned, the inventory, that's critical to understand where you're at in the total vulnerabilities or possibilities that are there. I mentioned, creating your policies and templates and your handbook policies for user interaction. And a lot of those things can probably be, I hate to say duplicated or plagiarized, but there is a library on the Tech Exchange where you can look at other counties' policies and there's no sense in recreating the wheel on this, but interject what specifically impacts your environment. And I'll talk a little bit more about the insurance. I mentioned the increase of our insurance. One of the nice things that they decided to do this year was they have a program that if we paid our policy, we were approved, we filled out all the questions correctly. And one of the questions was multi-factor authentication, just FYI. So that's one of the best practices. They actually had contracted through a group, and we did our vetting process, a group that provides some basic cybersecurity. They also provide services of phishing simulations. So we were able to use some of those services at no cost, other than the fact that our insurance, our cybersecurity premiums went up 62%. which was still less than hiring out at another firm. So those are just easy things to implement without a whole lot of cost. I would say, and I'm not sure if we have other slides that pertain to some of this. I mentioned Tech Exchange. There's a lot of good resources on that. I'm sure we could go into that a little more.
I will, yes.
Yeah. Our county uses resources from NACo, MSISAC, EIISAC, CISA, and NTIA. And we also have developed some relationships with some of our state departments who are associated with those groups also. So we have a, I'm not going to be able to think of it, a service that we use from MSISAC.
MDBR?
Yeah, that's it. Thank you. And it was amazing originally what we were seeing. And then we just started tweaking our email and policies within our internet connectivity. And we went from almost 500 possible vulnerabilities. And when I checked it this week, we're down to like 80 something. So it's a good, it helps protect, but it also gives you some statistics of if you're actually implementing things that are helping. So that was something that was very helpful. We've talked about our state association creating groups within the different areas and regions to, I hate to say, set up co-ops so that some of the resources that bigger counties use can be distributed through a group of counties instead of every individual small county having to develop their own and purchase their own system. So, you know, grouping those together and using the resources. Audrain County actually had an intergovernmental agreement with the city of Mexico, where the county seat's at, for 6 or 7 years to share the city technology resources they had, but we just sort of outgrew that. So we went a little bit different direction. We vetted some partners, and now we do all of our servicing is through a managed partner who monitors, does fix break or break fix services for us, manages all the infrastructure, monitoring, those types of things. And you know, I'll mention the multi-factor authentication since it's on the list here. We did want to implement that. And so we looked around, and one of the primary things that all of our elected officials and department heads insisted is that we were not going to require use of personal devices for the multi-factor. So having a code go out to somebody's personal cell phone. So we sort of used that as one of our prime objectives so that we could implement that without using personal devices and cell phones. Now we have that ability through BioKey, but that's not our primary goal. I think we have 2 people doing that, and that's through an actual county device, not a personal device. Some of that gets back into sunshine law requests and all those kind of things, and I won't go into all that detail, but that was a very big part of our decision-making process. And then on the cloud services, small counties could utilize a lot more of that, but then it gets back to the education of the decision makers. So when you say to cloud to some people, they immediately say, no, that's not for us. That's just too much, and we're becoming more vulnerable, when in reality, they would be less vulnerable by implementing some of those services that you can get on a cloud platform. So I'll leave it at that unless someone has questions, because I know we have quite a bit more good information from Rita.
Yeah, no, that was great, Commissioner Graham. And you know, from a partner perspective, please look for partners. You know, there are some amazing solutions out there, but depending on your infrastructure and your resources, make sure you have somebody that's partnering with you to take on the heavy lifting, answering your requests, getting back to you. You know, I've worked with enough customers now that come back and say, look, we requested support, and something like multi-factor authentication or access management, if it's not available, you can't log in, you can't get to your system. And so it's really important to have a vendor that has great support, great partnership with you, whoever that may be, or have a consultant or MSP, MSSP, somebody that's very responsive to what you need, is extremely helpful, especially when you have more limited resources. And then the other thing I'll just mention, the cyber awareness training. I Google everything, just to be clear, like anything I have. I wouldn't live without Google, I guess, at this point. If you type in free cyber awareness training, I found pages of free awareness trainings. And Rita, correct me, there might be some on Tech Exchange as well, but there are some really great self-guided links, trainings, things you can share with all of across the entire county. So again, there's a lot of resources out there that are just fully available if you're a small t-shirt. So
Absolutely. And yeah, they're very valuable. And there are some short video clips, this being October being Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Its focus is on you as a person, and the number of free resources is incredible. You just have to know where they are, and that's part of what we're providing today. So Commissioner Graham, I think you were going to say something.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on something that Kimberly mentioned about partnering. And so one of the things that we're very aware of is partnering, two partners coming together to form the solution. So like our MFA implementation. So our managed services partner actually works with the BioKey group, and it was a perfect partnership between those two vendors, not necessarily through the county. And sometimes you don't get that. Some of these proprietary systems, it's their way or no way. And unfortunately, then it gets to be finger pointing. So make sure that you have those conversations together with both partners at the same time, so that if you have to combine those resources, that it's a combination of the best of both worlds and not some finger pointing back and forth.
Right.
For sure. All right. So we will move on to medium t-shirt size. I can't wait to see what t-shirts we come up with, Rita.
I know, right? So
itching for a t-shirt sizing, but go ahead, Rita. I know you wanted to jump in on this one. You had great recommendations. So.
Well, and interestingly, the three of us, I think we kind of bounced ideas off of each other, which if I leave you with nothing else today, networking and communicating with others, it doesn't always have to be the IT professional. Here, Commissioner Graham's an elected official, Kimberly's a partner. And like when she said set SLAs for your cybersecurity program, I'm like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so what does that mean? What's a service level agreement for your cybersecurity program? We think about the SLAs with our partners, but even with your own cybersecurity program. So how soon are you detecting those attacks? The MSISAC puts out alerts, which are very helpful. If you have Office in the cloud, you have that advanced threat protection option, and that'll send you alerts. But look at it. How quickly are you detecting those attacks? And how quickly are you stopping the attack? This does get to what can I afford from a tool perspective. There are a lot of newer tools now that are going to, right at the firewall, block a ton of the malicious information and the emails and things that could come in that way. But how did your employees do on the last cyber awareness training? So small t-shirt size, you're doing the training, great. Are you measuring the training effects? And how you do that is, what's that percentage of the success rate? How many did you fish? And are there, taking another step further, and this is at a medium level, repeat customers, as we call it. Are you seeing the same employee in a department or employees within a department that seem to be succumbing to these phishing tests? That will help you customize and prioritize sitting down with those staff, either having them do additional training or having some one-on-one heart conversations. It's the helping them understand that every person does make a difference. Just like every vote counts, every staff person counts when it comes to preventing cyber attacks. And then, how many, as Commissioner Graham shared, the in the MDBR, how many malicious domain, how much was blocked, and what's the success rate of something getting through. So that I just wanted to mention that a little bit more detail about the SLAs. So looking at your third parties, I saw an email or text in the chat just about those third parties. And this is from a larger county perspective. If you're not attaching some sort of security questionnaire to your contracts, you need to be. And we have some of those samples in the Tech Exchange library. But please, I want to say force your way into the procurement process, but encourage your procurement officer. At this point, if you're a medium-sized county, you're going to probably have 1 or 2 folks dedicated to the procurement cycle. They're going to be involved in almost any of the procurements that departments are looking at. And so they're your best bet to get to know and take them out for coffee, take them out for lunch, and just talk through what you've been seeing across the board in the United States with the different types of attacks and why procurement, the vendor that you're selecting, it needs to be secure. Even if they're not like providing a technology service, they may have a website you have to log into. Be the HVAC folks. We all know what happened there years ago with Target. So making sure that as you work with your procurement folks, that you're getting that questionnaire or some sort of dialogue with the third parties before they're selected. Of course, refining your incident plan and having a dedicated team. This gets to our cyber simulations. I know I've looked at the folks that are on the call today, and a number of you have been in our cyber simulations. Great practice, and it gives you scenarios and it helps you think through what would we do if. From the people perspective, if you aren't already, and feel free to post in the chat, if you aren't already meeting with the elected officials on a regular basis, quarterly basis at least, to share your cyber strategy, I would encourage you to do so. It can be just an agenda item, and cybersecurity is a protected critical infrastructure. So you can do that in a closed session if you're doing it from a commissioner meeting perspective. Commissioner Graham, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my understanding. We were thankful when cybersecurity got added to the critical infrastructure a number of years ago. Another one that I recently came up with and was talking with some county ICIOs about, cross-train. Like we cross-train in departments to have like a database expertise person to manage your human services case management system, because we can't do it all in IT, but we can cross-train. We can have an expertise that with a little bit higher rights in the different departments. Same thing with cyber. To have a cyber champion, identify someone in each of your county departments and focus on training them, because it's like train the trainer. You train one person on what to look for. They're more aware with the staff that they interact with every day. If you're not familiar with Fed VTE, please take a look at that. While some of these things I would recommend across the board, it's harder when you're a small t-shirt size to find the time to do security training. Fed VTE has a lot of security training modules on there, and it is available at no cost. I mention this a lot to county CIOs and CISOs because it's a great program and many aren't aware of it. And then finally, you should be at a point in your journey with cybersecurity that you're putting in some sort of AI monitoring tools. Fortunately, in some states, Florida and Pennsylvania, the Albert sensor is being provided at no cost through MSISAC. There's also available through MSISAC endpoint protection and detection for what they call election staff, but that's a pretty broad statement. Anyone in the county that interacts with the election department can be a part of that no cost EDR solution that they offer, which is through CrowdStrike, if I remember correctly. And so these are named vendors, named providers that a lot of folks are using, and you can lower your cost, even if you have like half the county on through the no cost part, you can add the rest of your county at a reduced cost. And then finally, this is a challenge for all of us, streamlining single sign-on. And it's hard to stay on top of it because a department might get a new cloud application, and now you have to say, can we do single sign-on? Okay, if you can't do single sign-on, can we do MFA? At the beginning of the procurement process, when you're looking for a new provider, make that a requirement. As Commissioner Graham mentioned, MFA is not a nice to have anymore. Regardless of your t-shirt size, you need to have a t-shirt. So same way you need to have multi-factor authentication. I love the restaurant sign, no t-shirt, no service. Kind of the same thing here. You're really opening yourself up to vulnerabilities without having multi-factor authentication in place, and the single sign-on option will strengthen that even more. Let's see. So those are the comments I have for the medium-sized t-shirt as we referred to it today.
Yeah, I think, and just to echo, so single sign-on, right? I always say multi-factor is that strong front door. You get in, now you have lots of passwords to every app. You want to get rid of those, right? I've actually seen it where it becomes an incentive. So if you're rolling out SSO and let's say a new department finds a new app, which they will, it's actually saying to them, like, you don't have to log in if you get SSO as part of your requirements. And the other thing I'm seeing a trend of, which, you know, pros and cons, I'm not sure how I feel about it yet. Applications are now requiring you to buy the next most expensive tier to get SAML or to get single sign-on. And so it is, I just purchased an app for my marketing department actually. And lo and behold, the pro plan didn't include SSO. So it's really important when you're looking to purchase an application, and then realize that the even really clunky apps, so if you're used to web apps and things that are pretty easy to integrate, it's really important though you don't forget those big legacy ERP type systems or things that are, you know, just don't speak modern protocol is how I would word those. Definitely still possible to do single sign-on to those. But when you're looking for that type of solution, just make sure you're asking if they can handle legacy apps. And then on the risk management, Rita knows I have background in risk management. I'll flip to large because we talk a little bit about managing and monitoring your risk for not only you, but we call it nth parties. So like forget third, then you go to fourth, then you go to nth. And so, you know, questionnaires are amazing for medium size. I'd even echo to try to get some contractual language, if you at all can, that says there's some kind of responsibility on the vendor side that they're actually, you know, have good cybersecurity hygiene. But I will, you know, fully promote also a continuous monitoring, which I know, Rita, you've done pilots with some of the security rating vendor and things like that out there, but it's really important to continuously monitor risk for yourself and for your third parties, anyone that's really connecting to your services. And that's that continuously monitoring part.
Yeah, and if I could interrupt real quick.
Go right ahead.
Security scorecard, BitSite, two competitors in the market. We did a pilot with security scorecard, but I know for sure security scorecard has a free license approach where you can do some limited. You can see your score, and then you can see the score of 4 other vendors that you might want to track. It's not an end all to everything, but it is one perspective of what does the public see when it comes to your security for your domain. So highly recommend, taking some time to sign up for one of those. And we also have some other reduced pricing as well for security scorecard.
Yeah, no, that, and like I said, we could go on and on, tier your vendors. Maybe Rita at some point we'll do a whole, it's not BioKey space, but I'm always happy to talk third-party risk management. One of my favorite.
Oh, and I don't, to intrigue the rest of you that are on, I am researching and looking at another service out there that is free to the government community, that it's not necessarily specific to cyber of your vendors, but it is kind of like a Yelp system.
Yeah.
So watch for more details on that.
That's great. Yeah, look, we're all connected. We always said,
Right.
like, you're only as good as your weakest link kind of thing.
Right.
And so that's really important. From a large perspective, obviously this is a more mature program. Things are going to be more structured. You should have a GRC structure in place, right? A formal GRC structure in place. And so, if you're familiar with that from a governance perspective, you should have a set standard and framework that you're working off of, whether that's NIST, ISO, et cetera. That should really be ruling a lot of your policy config and how you configure your programs. From a compliance, not only should you know what the standards are, but monitoring and measuring whether or not you're meeting them and auditing them, as well as external auditors checking if you're in compliance with any compliance standard that you have. And then, as we talked about risk, that's really going into that continuous monitoring of yourself. Measuring risk, quantifying risk is an entire exercise, but it's extremely important because what it does is it sends out those beacons and signals to say, hey, you have a high volume of risk here. Potentially, if something happened to that asset or that vendor, there's a lot of impact to your county directly, which is really, really important. Rita, do you want to talk a little bit about the dashboards and the cyber team? I know you have a necessity up here that I think everybody should hear, which is
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're at that large t-shirt size, whether it's a large county or just really sophisticated, advanced of cyber defense approach, especially if you're a larger county, you need a dedicated special. I can't highly stress how important that is. It's so vital, and you can't sit on the sidelines. And you need to do some, as you said earlier, some risk analysis. And I have to share something with you. Interestingly, I'd never heard of this. Came from my adult son today. So how do you solve the bug, as a question mark? So, getting hit with a cyber virus, ostrich algorithm. And I'm like, ostrich algorithm? So I looked it up. I mean, he had the screenshot here, and it's basically you ignore potential problems on the basis that they may be exceedingly rare. It's SWOT analysis.
Yeah.
And I've done this over the years. What's the likelihood of something happening? Where do you focus your attention and your money at, and your resources? You do it for those things that are high probability are going to happen. Florida right now is a great example. Everybody in Florida and that eastern coast down in North Carolina, South Carolina, down into Florida, they have the window treatments, the boards to cover their windows. It's not a nice to have, it's a must to have. Now, will we use it? You're going to use it at some point, maybe 2 or 3 times in a year, maybe 6 times in a year. So that's where you want to put your efforts. And how do you see this? How do you do this? It gets to the dashboard. If you're tracking and measuring your effectiveness of your cyber programs and your monitoring, and can show that in a dashboard, the NCSR, the National Cybersecurity Analysis and Review Survey is coming out here in a couple of days. It'll be opening up. And when you take that, at the end, you can show a dashboard, and it shows your improvement from last year to this year. Simple 5 columns, doesn't have to be complicated. But you are tracking and you're paying attention, and it's going to help show where you may have weaknesses. From the just 2 other things real quickly so that we can get to the last couple slides. But looking at where your gaps are, and with your cyber team, giving them the opportunity to get cyber certifications. I mentioned the Fed VTE. There's actually some certifications through that process that they can have access to, especially if money is tight. But if you're at this large size, you really should have some dedicated funds for those cyber certifications that are available. And then regularly penetration tests and that clear path to zero trust. Zero trust doesn't happen overnight. It is a journey. And to a point that was made earlier in the chat, change comes hard. Implementing MFA, if you haven't already, you're going to get resistance, and sometimes it's from the I'll call it the higher ups. And well, oh, this is good for the county staff, but I don't have to do it. Yes, you do. And there's some precedent there, I think in Georgia, where the council member didn't want to do it, and it became public. The minute it became public is when the council member said, okay, I'm MFA, I got it.
So Rita,
yeah,
I'm going to jump in on this because it's sort of funny, because we implemented ours as a slow rollout, and guess who got picked to be the very first trial test bed? It was the commissioners of the county, because I decided that we're going to start at the top and show everybody that we think this is important, and we're going to do this ourselves before anybody else has to deal with it. So anyway.
Absolutely. And I tell you what, Commissioner Graham, if every county could have elected official like you, it would be a whole lot easier to implement things like this.
Yeah. So we'll, and I know I just want to be careful. Gosh, we should do a t-shirt size per webinar, but, so we've talked about multi-factor authentication. Every county should have it. It was in the small t-shirt size in case anybody missed it. There's a reason it was there. Just to reiterate, for any of you that think it is the Missouri Farmers Association, did I get that right, Commissioner Graham? Something like that. Heard all kinds of acronyms. It's really, my main point actually here is multi-factor authentication includes 3 types of methods. And the issue we're having in the industry right now is a lot of solutions are only doing something, like a password, plus something you have, like Commissioner Graham mentioned, like a personal phone or a one-time passcode. The issue with those is that it's not identifying the person, the actual human completing the action. And in some cases, you need to be able to do that. Make sure any solution that you look at is able to also provide something you are, which is really a biometric method. Rita, I'm going to skip to the next slide, but I know you had a comment on the NACo grant.
Yeah, before you go, I do want to make one comment here. It's important that whatever solution you're selecting has all of those capabilities. It doesn't mean you have to implement every one of them at the same time. You just don't want to be boxed into a corner and not be able to have that third piece.
Yeah,
if I can interject, just be aware also, some states are implementing legislation on biofactor or bio readers and how you store that information. So just be aware of that. But we're actually using fingerprint readers in Missouri.
Yep. And that's a good point. Thank you, Commissioner.
Yep. It's all, yeah, there's laws, BIPA, CCPA. If anyone has a biometric privacy question or biometric data question, I can promise you we have a 20-year veteran who loves to talk about this. He's our chief legal officer. But yeah, make sure any solution you use biometrics or store data, it is built with privacy and compliance in mind. So we've talked, I think we've actually covered a lot of this, really in terms of rolling out multi-factor authentication. It should be done as a phased approach. I loved the comment in the chat because honestly, the hardest part about MFA is the change management with people. It's not actually that we can implement MFA rather quickly. It's more so just getting folks to adopt it, understand why they need it. Really quickly from a small t-shirt size, honestly, you can also start with better password policy and password vaulting. If you're going to have people using passwords, make sure they're not writing them down, make sure they're using secure ones. There are ways to improve password management, but otherwise start rolling out multi-factor authentication. Don't end up with 5, I've seen up to 8 vendors all at once trying to be used in unison because they started with a mobile-based one. That didn't work. Now we got hardware tokens. That didn't work right for... What happens is certain user groups can't use those things. So really make sure you future-proof and plan. In the medium size, we talked about single sign-on. Again, all applications, do not exclude the legacy apps or the big, thick client apps. Those will end up kind of getting you in the end. They'll be like that rogue password login that you don't want to have in your environment. And then continuous and adaptive is definitely a much more mature approach. It is a end of the road, kind of end of journey piece, or I should say towards the end, I guess it never ends. But continuous adaptive takes in the context. So if I'm in Boston where I live, I may not have as many requirements to log in. If I'm now in Fiji, I wish I was in Fiji. If I was in Fiji, then I would be getting asked to supply more authentication to prove who I am. And now Continuous actually does that checking of someone logging in all the time when they're in an application. So if you're banking and you go to request a transfer, it will force more. And then the last thing I'd say in large is you're not just authenticating people. You should be authenticating systems, workloads, devices, and people. So that's really the zero trust mentality, goes beyond just a person logging in. Commissioner Graham and Rita, any final thoughts on this one? Then we can jump to the next steps.
Nope, I'm good.
All right. So now what, Rita? What's next for folks listening in?
Well, here are some takeaways for today. I like the 10-minute program maturity exercise that you have, especially if maybe you're new to county government and just coming into the position of being responsible for security, and you haven't done what's called the NCSR. I'll talk to that in a minute. So take a look at that. Take a look at MSISAC. Hopefully everyone on this call is a member and is aware of those no-cost services. There's some low-cost services, but the no-cost ones right away. And the MDVR is a great example. Easy to implement, 10 minutes, okay, maybe 15, but does not take much time at all. And then, as I mentioned, the NCSR opens here on October 1st. If you've never completed it, there is a newer option that is like 30 questions. The longer version takes about 3 hours. Well worth it for medium and large t-shirt sizes. For the small t-shirt size, start with that new, it's a PDF version as opposed to the online, but really helps you focus, especially if you've not filled it out before. And it is required for grants. And the new notice of funding opportunity that just came out a week ago, under the infrastructure bill for state and local territories and tribes. For the territories, a tribe one will be separate. When you apply through your state, you're going to have to complete the NCSR in some fashion. And just a quick note about that, there's going to be more webinars provided by DHS, CISA specifically, and that should be coming out here in the next day or so. We're getting a lot of good information. And if you are on the tech exchange, you're seeing some of the emails that are summarizing it. And also there's a blog post on NACo.org for just Google NACo space cyber NOFO. That'll get you to it pretty quickly. And then the other thing we just so happen we've been discussing procurement today. The cyber simulation in November is going to be focused on a scenario where there's procurement taking place with the department and IT wasn't included, and the solution was procured. The contract is weak when it comes to cyber language, and there's a cyber incident. So encourage you when you get this presentation today to register for the cyber simulation. No cost to NACo members and NACo Tech Exchange Unlimited members. So we've got a minute left. I know I've been watching the chat and putting some comments in the chat in response. If there's anything else anyone wants to ask, please feel free to email us with the questions. But what I'd like to do is give Commissioner Graham an opportunity to close us out.
Okay, I won't be very long. Just a couple things I wanted to comment on was Rita mentioned about the infrastructure funding and grants. That is all rolling through state departments. So if you haven't, contact your state and just be adamant that you want to be on that planning committee for disbursement of those funds. And in the law, it actually states that there has to be representation from local municipalities and governments. So they have to allow some seats for people in county government. And then also there's a percentage of funds that are supposed to be directed to counties less than 50,000. So make sure that you look at that and participate in that and try to get on that board, because that'll help your any county size representation from local governments.
Right,
Thanks, Rita.
right. All right, we're at the top of the hour and really appreciate everyone staying logged in. We'll make sure that the recording is made available, and Kimberly Ransom will send that out here, if not today, first thing tomorrow, with the PowerPoint attached. So thank you, everyone. Have a great day.